I do think there is a tipping point. So if we think about construction and technology and the data that you're capturing, you definitely need your specific use case. There may be some redundant data that you end up using, but you do need to focus on the use case. Otherwise, it's just going to become counterproductive for the team.
In the construction industry, the pre-construction phase is critical in setting the stage for successful project outcomes. It involves thorough planning, coordination, and analysis to ensure that projects are delivered on time, within budget, and to the required quality standards. Central to these efforts is the effective use of data and digital tools, which are transforming traditional approaches with more efficient, precise, and collaborative processes. By leveraging advanced technologies such as BIM and integrating data management strategies, the construction industry can enhance decision making, optimize resources, and reduce risks. Simple, right? On paper, yes. But when implementing new processes, there is always risk. Risk that not everyone is on the same page, risk that technology fails, risk of legacy systems, incorrect data, and the lack of enough knowledge within the industry to truly make things stick. Think we better meet today's guest, who should help to settle our nerves on this one a little bit. Anita Soni is a digital transformation leader in the construction industry, utilizing data and information management tools and processes to enhance design and construction productivity through BIM, engineering, surveying, and geospatial solutions. Anita has a proven track record of leading and delivering BIM processes on multi-sector, mega, and large infrastructure projects with extensive and successful experience in pre-construction, delivering digital and innovative strategies, as well as pre-construct documentation for tenders. With an engineering doctorate from UCL in geomatic engineering, Anita is a chartered surveyor for RICS and the founder of DataStruct, as well as consulting for Third Digital, who specialize in CDE configuration and BIM CAD management services. Honestly, every single bio that I read out, the words get longer, the sentences get longer, the titles get longer and more complex. Anyway, Anita, did I miss anything off that bio? And welcome.
No, thank you, Peter. Thanks for the invitation. I think we've covered it. I could obviously bore you to death about all the details. I did have a stint where I was working with laser scanning on film sets for visual effects, but I think
cool.
Let's focus on the construction side today.
Damn this podcast. Okay, yeah, for sure. Let's do that. Let's do that. Okay, right. Let's get cracking. So, as we know, BIM has been the cornerstone of modern construction practices, significantly transforming every part of it, including pre-construction. Creating digital representations of the physical and functional characteristics of places, BIM provides a shared knowledge resource for information to a reliable basis for decisions to be made. However, back in 2020, an MBS BIM annual report stated that 64% of respondents highlighted a lack of demand as a barrier to adoption. So let's start by proving the haters wrong, shall we? And discuss how BIM can enhance pre-construction processes.
Okay, so specifically for pre-construction, as we know, let's go back to basics. Information management and BIM is about the creation and the use and the reuse of all the various different aspects of information. So if we think about, there's so many, everyone keeps talking about the end in mind. So if we think about the beginning, this is where you're going from your concepts. You've got a really nice idea, you've got your concepts, you've got a consultant advising the client. So it is quite early doors. However, when you're then taking that information for a tier one contractor, for example, to tender for, you need some tangible information to cost against, to plan against, etc. So this is now not just about the BIM and the CAD, the graphical side of stuff. It's also about the non-graphical information and understanding your surveys, your reports, ground conditions, etc. So I think often where there used to just be a set, I've been told by traditional methods, it was just a case of just issuing some drawings and you had to put a cost against it.
Okay.
Whether or not that was accurate in the end, also there's lots of fun surprises that come later on, especially, like I said again, with like, for me, ground conditions seem to be the one thing that keeps reoccurring on all the large projects that I've worked on in terms of surprises. But if you're able to give some context and visualize what you want to build, the current situation and what you want to build, that provides heaps of value already, whether or not there's intelligence and data behind it. But just visualizing that in a really coherent way, I think that's first and foremost, which is still BIM. It's still that information that you're visualizing. But then also, if you want to start to get a bit more mature around it, say with costing and carbon, obviously now, if you can put that intelligence behind it, that's where BIM is truly quite valuable for the pre-construction. If you want to have a project that's on time and on budget, you need to provide as much information as you can at the tender stage. Now, I understand it's quite hard for people to go into that level of detail. There's so many projects there that we know, that we've seen in the press, where they've just gone over budget because they didn't really appreciate how much it was actually going to cost. But if you put that front end investment in, and I'm not trying to be really naive and say, yeah, just throw loads of money at it. I think if you can really think about the what you want to get out of it, your handover, work backwards, the detail to some extent that you can provide, I really do see that there is that value from the client side, but then also from the contractor side and the designer side, because then we as contractors, I say with my experience as contracting, we can give you a far beneficial program and cost estimate rather than a generic one that's just trying to let's say hit the targets and hit the fees and hit the requirements that the client has. So let's try and be a bit more genuine about it. So I did work recently on a tender which actually provided a decent amount of BIM, CAD and GIS information. And not only was that allowing us to quickly visualize and inform the project team, because I don't know if you've seen, like when you see a concept of a design, I still struggle to read design, to read drawings, and you know I've got years of experience of looking at them, and you're like, what are you trying? How is this going to work? But the minute you've got better visualization, that then helps everyone to understand and be on board quite quickly of what you're actually trying to build and what the key challenges will be, rather than just talking about it, producing loads of PowerPoint presentations with blocks and trying to guess. Been there so many times, and I'm just like, I don't understand what's going on here. So yeah, having a structured way to visualize and inform that through GIS, through BIM, coordination models, etc., and making it accessible to the project team, straight away everyone's on board. So then you can focus on, oh, are there any innovations? How can we maximize the time, or how can we plan better when we've got all these conditions that we need to take into account? So, and in fact, it was the planners that then were able to see very quickly that the program wasn't going to work that the client had provided, because of all the ecology surveys, which then delayed the site access because there's like 12-month restrictions, etc. So straight away, from visualizing and informing the information that come from the client, we were able to highlight key challenges, which probably wouldn't have come out until after award if we didn't have that level of information. So it does show real benefit and value.
So how much of a, and I know it massively depends on who you're talking to, but how much of a hard sell is it in terms of going back to what you were saying before, you invest up front to save in the longer term and during the project? Because I think we've all been there in our normal lives where it's easy to say, oh, I'm going to save up for this thing, but in harsh reality, it's like as time progresses, it gets harder because you want to kind of spend and what I suppose what I'm trying to get at is that I could see people saying, well, yeah, but how sure are you it's going to save money? Because if we get into it, we spent all this money and we end up spending all the money anyway, that feels like a waste. Is it a hard sell? Or, I mean, once someone's been through it, I'm guessing it's like they see the benefit, right?
So I think that's the thing. You need to have a good worked example.
Okay.
I think there's two scenarios. So um, having worked on HS2, where there was a lot of investment at the front to set up systems and information, you can see there was that digital thread and
Hmm.
they'd actually thought about it. So I think if you're able to map out, even at a high level, you can start to see the benefits already.
Yeah.
And same with actually Lower Thames Crossing. Again, I hope it's okay to name drop these projects.
Yeah,
I
sure.
think they had the vision, so at least that's a start. And whether or not that there is that maturity, because you can't say what your handover requirements are
Hmm.
necessarily from day one of a brand new project, where it's completely new, but they had the vision. So I think I've definitely seen firsthand the benefits of that investment front end, and that has expedited, and it's always been at the back of the mind for everyone as well. If you said like we've thought about this and we've invested in this, and it's all everyone keeps thinking, even though we're not quite sure how we're going to get there, it's still the end in mind.
For sure. Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, it's a combination. Obviously it helps when you've got a worked example, but
Yeah.
I have seen where there has been investment from the clients with the end. And it just feels, even though processes can be tedious, I think you all have that common goal to work towards.
Mm.
And I think that's what everyone needs sometimes, rather than being a bit reactive.
Yeah. I suppose it's a little bit like I don't like you. I don't like to use the word dieting, but let's just stick with that because that's probably a common phrase that people use. But it's like if you are going to diet, um, then it's dead easy to say that and have that process and cut calories at certain points in your life. But to maintain that up to a certain end point and reach that goal,
Yeah, yeah.
it's harder to put it into practice. Yeah,
Oh, yeah, completely. I'm not seeing the perfect example. I
yeah,
think the perfect diet, let's say, I think there is sacrifice, there is compromise. That's with anything in life, I would say as
yeah.
well. But yeah, I think you have to really think about what you want from it at the end. So your maintainer,
Mm,
if they're going to engage with something like BIM and BIM facilities management and maintenance, then that's already a win for you to then say from the very beginning,
yeah,
we want to maintain this asset in a smart way. Um, so yeah, if you think about what your end goal is, if you want to fit into that dress, for example, that will get you to that with the diet, etc. I don't know. I'm just trying to yeah, analogies, but you need that incentive, and it
yeah,
just needs to be one incentive to dangle the carrot.
yeah.
I would say to then incentivize people. The use case,
Hmm.
as we keep
Cool.
saying. So yeah.
When a project gets going and fast forward to the actual delivery of that project, we can collect and analyze and interpret quite a lot of data on ongoing, which helps with project management, risk mitigation on site, etc., etc. But what about in the pre-construction phase? What are the most impactful ways we can use data to inform better decision making on the project?
I would say it's two parts. So that's when you receive the pre-construction information, you need to start creating some processes, or you need to start establishing, or say your business as usual. You've got your standards. So say you've used ISO 19650 to manage your information in a CDE. When you're then handing that information over or exchanging that with a tier one or a designer, for example, um, that's where you need to make sure you've got the right processes. So it's more
Mm,
about developing that process to then inform for the detailed design, the construction, and the handover. Because the client would have been working in a very high level way, and that's when you need to get into the detail. So I would say actually it's not just about the information, it's about creating the strategy for the processes and how you're going to manage the information throughout the life cycle. That's your golden opportunity. In terms of actual information as well, it's a great example. So again, for Lower Thames Crossing, it wasn't just about the information that we were receiving, it was then about how we would structure the information that we're receiving to set from the go,
okay.
because that's your blank slate. That's your starting point. So, and actually it was a bit of trial and error, I must admit. So we tried to set it up in one way and turns out it wasn't suitable for everyone. So then you have to sort of reshift. The benefit, the key benefit is that you want to then not be having to change. Say you win that project, you then don't want to have to reshift all the information in a way that works for everyone. You want to say, right, that's it. So I would say it's actually the precursor for the rest of the project to work. And that has challenges in itself because you don't know what's coming. There'll be other perks that come along the way where you need to add and incorporate. So many times I've had conversations halfway through detailed design. It was like, oh, we need to factor this in. Right, the CDE configuration, that needs to change. We need to adapt, but that impacts these guys, and it's going to impact this. So you can only do your best with the information that you have at the time. But I would say it's definitely the precursor. It's great for visualizing, contextualizing the information and setting your baseline. But it's with the information that you have, but it's your opportunity to set the precedents for the rest of the project.
Yeah, and you're not going to foresee everything. It's you within our world. There's never going to be that perfect build, that perfect project where everything goes 100% to plan, and there is nothing untoward or unforeseen.
Yeah, you never, I don't know if this sounds really naive, but we're never building the same thing twice. And even if you were to say build exactly the same building next to each other, okay, that may allow you to do a lot of lessons learned from the first one to the second one to streamline it. And I think there is a case study actually where they built the same building in a different location. So they were able to take those lessons learned. But from infrastructure, and my background, it's never the same. Like you can always maybe have the same structural side of stuff, but the interface, especially on rail, you're never going to have the same situation conditions. And so that's where it makes it hard. You can definitely take some aspects that are quite niche and siloed and make sure you do apply that in your next project. For example, a bridge, say it's the same structural side, that's fine, that's streamlined, but there'll be other aspects around the surrounding conditions, the interfaces, the technology and signaling, for example. Everything's going to be different, so you do have to be quite agile even though you've got set processes.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to something a bit more I'd say advanced, really. So it's talking about GeoBIM. So for people that are listening, integration of geographic information system data with BIM. So by combining spatial data with detailed BIM models, GeoBIM enables a more comprehensive view of the project environment, which is crucial for site analysis, urban planning, infrastructure, like you were saying, etc., etc. Back in 2019, so 5 years ago, a research paper highlighted that GeoBIM at that time was mainly used for urban planning, whereas in the future, i.e. now, it would be topographic mapping followed by a whole host of other planning and management functions. So can you explain how and what benefits GeoBIM brings to construction projects? I know you've mentioned a few, but let's go into a bit more detail.
Yeah, I can even say from a pre-con perspective. So we did apply GeoBIM for pre-con. So that allowed us not only to visualize and inform, as I've mentioned before, but it was to access the information better, but understand the context. So typically for pre-con and during tender, you receive maybe some CAD files, maybe some surveys, maybe some BIM models, and maybe stuff only in GIS. So GeoBIM, it's a no-brainer for me. That's where GeoBIM is able to bring all that information in, compared to just traditionally having, say, a Navisworks model or a coordination model. Yes, you might have a nice design, but you've got no context. So straight away, you're able to see ecology surveys, topo surveys that have been carried out, as well as overlay the design and proposed design over it. So for me, that's immense and that's huge, because a BIM model won't be able to provide you or give you that context of the ecology surveys. We were then also able to then take the sequencing diagrams and in 2D produce what the proposed sequencing was with the BIM model, design, surveys as well. So you're able to then, almost like a tick box, choose your information that you need far more easily over the web, no specialist software needed, to really understand and interrogate, to then highlight any geospatial clashes that you can already see, which you might not get from the BIM model alone in a viewer. So already that power and insight, and it helps different disciplines. So the commercial team then saw this and straight away were able to see the scale and then understand and work with the planners to understand what needs to be delayed, and then the costs of the planning being adjusted to then be more accurate. So it does allow faster understanding for everyone on the project. Even sort of big coordinators, they then begin to appreciate the scale. And then it's around supporting the planning, the commercial, and the design management functions for that. And I think we were able to do, I remember this because we were doing a presentation on this, it was about 80% faster. We were able to then relay that information. And there was a real perk with this particular tender. They did data drops over a 6-month period. And they changed the design halfway through. So that was where it was really beneficial for us to then, okay, we had the baseline, we put it into GeoBIM. They then did another data drop. And then within a day, we were able to then say, okay, guys, the design has changed and this is the change. And then you're able to address things like value engineering. But that probably would have traditionally taken a couple of weeks to then get the model rebaselined, then do a visual check of what had changed. We didn't get any report or information of what had changed. So straight away, you're able to visualize and do some change detection with GeoBIM, and then issue that out to everyone with minimal cost. They don't need specialist software. There's no IT issues. You can just say, right, this is the latest information and these are the key changes. So we know that construction is very dynamic. So I think GeoBIM does adhere to that dynamic nature and that latency challenge that you do have. So that was really useful for pre-construction. Sorry, I sort of dragged on about that. But
No.
for construction as well, I've had first-hand experience of using it with the whole you're trying to get the latest design out. So from the office, you're trying to get the latest design out. There's lots of information being shared between site teams and design teams, RFIs, any sort of queries that are happening. And then there's actual construction information that's being captured. So for me, that's where GeoBIM is immensely useful, especially on linear projects and infrastructure, where you've just got loads of people working various different locations. People are either visualizing, analyzing, or capturing information, or trying to exchange information, where neither just GIS nor BIM would be able to sort of produce the biggest benefit and the most efficient use of visualize and exchange that information. So GeoBIM, it integrates the what and the where. And I think obviously with the right processes and the right data standards and the your definitions and work breakdown structures, it allows you to easily tap into at any given point what's going on site. And that's what a project director needs, project manager needs, highlight where there's key challenges happening. If there's lots of issues on site, that's where and you can visualize it. It's not it's area 1, 2, 3. You can then go and see it on a map as well. And from the human brain, they're able to understand that and comprehend that way better than understanding what a location is. And you can confirm it as well. There's no potential error of misunderstanding your location.
So
yeah.
what just to dumb it down slightly, in doing research for this into GeoBIM, it was interesting to note that, and it's things you just don't even think of, but it's interesting to note things like weather and shadows and buildings and things like that.
Yeah.
That like you were saying, no two buildings are ever the same. You know, you do the exact same building 100 meters down a street or whatever, and there could be another building that creates a shadow and all that kind of stuff that you need to take into consideration. I know that sounds a bit basic,
No.
but like something that I would just never even think of. Oh, we'll put this building here. Oh, by the way, this shadow at 3 o'clock, it's going to be covering most of the building.
Yeah, and that's huge. So again, traditionally for survey, we used to do lines of sight, and you're able to give discrete points, and then say this is going to be blocked, this is going to be obscured, this is fine. But it was discrete points. It was no visualization, no context, and it was just done on nice imagery. So then they would introduce the shade and the shadow in Photoshop. So we've come a long way. So now actually I've got a really nice use case for that with HS2, where you've got a lot, especially in the central London area, so many residential areas. And so there was a stakeholder engagement session with the local residents. And what we were able to do is be one of them in their apartments, in the flats, the story, and just see what was going to go on. And that wasn't just for the end product, that was for all the different stages, because we had the design and the program, and then also bringing in the gangs as well, so you could visualize that and say you're going to see a lot of work, this is what your view is going to be like. For the sort of consultation period, that was it, you do have to be quite transparent. So we were able to use GeoBIM and incorporate the lines of sight, but also, like you say, the time of day, and just say for the next X number of years, this is what it's going to look like for you. So it does allow you to be transparent with stakeholders, which is always important.
Absolutely, yeah. Just talking about information management in general across a construction project, how easy or tricky is it to keep that information up to date, almost single source of truth, if you like, when there's so many people working on a large project, so many organizations, so many individuals, so many different platforms and software and hardware? Is this, I'm guessing we're getting better as everything becomes more open with APIs, etc. But does it cause problems, or are we over that?
Yeah, definitely causes problems. If I think about 4 projects back, it was just a bit of a blocker and there was no way around it, a bit more manual intervention. There were people in my team then having to do the manual updates of information from various different CDEs. And then I can see it has evolved as the projects have got more advanced with technology. And like you say, integration and APIs has definitely helped a lot. All I would say is then you just have to be mindful of the data and your schemas and what you want to capture where, and just being mindful of that. So that's where I think you can then have too much information. I think one of the things that was quite keen to talk about was, can you have too much information, too much data? I believe if you don't have the right processes and standards in place, you can, because then it just becomes redundant, and your team are basically trying to recover all the information, and you're spending more time doing that than actually utilizing it in a productive way. So I've got a really interesting use case of where we had information from the detailed design that was helping to inform the quality and inspection forms that you have to capture when you're on site. So we needed to integrate from ProjectWise to one of the CDEs on site, and it was not as easy as we thought. There was a lot of integration, and sometimes it's not even live integration. It's not an hourly feed, for example. So there are risks. However, I was listening to a podcast yesterday from a chap in America, and he basically said, I don't have any conversations with software companies after that. I asked 2 questions. Do you have any SDKs? What are your APIs? And it made me laugh, because I think that's what you do have to sort of ask now, unfortunately. There's no one single CDE that does everything. You do have to make that connection, because just the way the cookie crumbles, certain CDs are good for certain aspects, whether it's a phase of a project or a specific process. There isn't, unfortunately, one size fits all. So you do have to integrate. I've personally seen the involvement, to answer your question. I've personally seen an involvement, and it has got better. And I think we're a bit more clued up on what we need to ask when we're procuring tools. I wouldn't say it's fixed or solved.
Yeah, sure.
You still have to integrate with many CDEs.
Yeah, I agree. I remember 6-7 years ago, and it was very much the norm that everything data would be protected and it would be siloed and very much kept in an organization, and it's almost like a 180 now. If there is no API, as you were saying, if there is no integration possibilities, it is massive prohibitive for an organization to get involved in projects.
Now it's about the integration with GeoBIM. So it does seem to be that common collaboration tool, and it is fantastic for collaborating. But then you do need to be able to integrate that with some of your construction processes and tools, which is done. But like, if you want to create a form off that, I know there are solutions out there, but then packaging that form, like, it's just like really niche things. Like, for example, even though I disagree with it, but packaging a PDF, you then can't necessarily do that in the site form capture tool that you've done. And it just feels like intuitively that should be there, but sadly it isn't. And that's not to dismiss what people are doing out there in construction technology. I get that they've built it for that use case, but when we keep talking about the digital thread, the holistic view with the end in mind, I've not seen an end-to-end CDE, so you do have to
for sure
factor in.
So I just want to go back to a point you raised. That's about having too much data and slightly rephrase that. There was a recent report by Autodesk and Deloitte, Access Economics, mouthful. I should have just said Deloitte. And they found that the UK leads other European countries on construction project data, but over a third of these projects, on a third of the projects, the data is not analysed due to a lack of process and data integration. So on that aspect, rather than too much data, how do we ensure that we're just collating, or just utilising the right data and not falling into the trap of just collecting data for data's sake?
Well, yeah, I think that's where the use case comes in.
Okay.
So I have only seen one example from a client where they have defined their data requirements, even at a high level. They've defined their data requirements of each discipline at each stage, and that was amazing to see. I'd never seen that before. So even though they hadn't said specifically this is what but like for this type of function, for O&M, health and safety, for digital as well, we're going to need. So if you don't necessarily have that information when you're going through your design and construction, you're going to then just capture everything in the hopes that it will be useful at the end. Whereas the minute you have some sort of what we would probably say the digital data model or data dictionary, for example, that then helps you work backwards and then appreciate and map it out. So let's say there's a bridge that you need to maintain and the O&M needs this type of information from the various different functions. That allows you to map backwards. And then for me, that was then allows you to create your data standards, your processes, and then obviously the tools. But just going back to the data thing, that then streamlines the data that you need to capture and keeps you quite on your toes and strict. There's no deviation. You may end up using that information for something else, which is fantastic. So that's great when I've seen an actual data standard coming from a client. When you don't have that, you sort of have to not guess, but you have to then go back to their standards and their requirements to then map it out yourself. I'm not like, I'm happy to be corrected out there in the industry, but if there's something that exists for a complete operating model, I think one of the clients called it a digital operating model, that will allow you to then understand what data needs to be collected when and by whom and who needs to manage it, which I then believe will help with that reduction in redundant data. Because for me, I think there is a lot of data being captured, as I agree with that study, there's a lot of data being captured out there. And you're either wasting resource to try and analyze it when there's actually no use case, or so just be really strict with your use cases and why you need to have that data captured. The whole challenge was around, we're capturing this asset, let's say this bridge, that's so much data. 20 years ago, that was too much data to manage and nobody knew what to do with it. Technology has changed, so we're able to manage it better. But also, everyone has appreciated the return on investment of that data and the multiple uses of it. So I do think there is a tipping point. So if we think about construction and technology and the data that you're capturing, you definitely need your specific use case. There may be some redundant data that you end up using, but you do need to focus on the use case. Otherwise, it's just going to become counterproductive for the team. So it would be nice to be able to, in the future, treat it as if it was a point cloud survey that was being captured, and you're like, oh, actually, I don't need to go on site and do an inspection because we've got the point cloud and I can see without going on site. Health and safety, you've reduced that risk, especially on track.
Yeah.
But I think it's a bit harder when you're looking at other aspects of construction, data being captured. A lot could be redundant. So that's where understanding the use case and the requirements and the handover requirements helps you filter out any potential too much data being captured.
For sure. I think that's a great place to end. This conversation hasn't been redundant, which is excellent. So there's no data wasted in this creation. Just Anita, thank you so much for your time. It's so interesting talking about pre-con, but also how we utilize data throughout a project and your expertise. It comes through. So thank you so much for sharing all that information. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the invitation.